This is a Walt and Winnie Dette dry fly from the 1930s called the Bradley. It was tied specifically for William Bradley. I'm tying it on a number 12 fine wire hook. I'm using white thread that I have waxed with a darkish cobbler's wax to get it to a tan, according to the recipe in Mike Valla's The Founding Flies. The recipe calls for red cock for the tail and the hackle, so I'm going to use this. I think this is technically a furnace, but it's red. I don't want to use a commercially dyed red, so I want to go something a little bit more natural, although this may be dyed as well, I don't know. But that's my story and I'm sticking with it. So I'll just grab a few barbs off of this hackle feather. Try to get those barbs lined up evenly for the tail. I want the tail to be approximately the length of the shank. So I'll lay those on top of the shank a little bit to the front, and then when I wrap, the thread will take it up onto the top. And I will bring that back to where the bend of the hook starts. If I wrap underneath of that tail once, that'll help it to stand up. I'll bring my thread back up towards the front. I'll go ahead and clip out the butt ends. Bring my thread up to where I'm going to eventually tie in the wing and the hackle. The recipe calls for red squirrel back spun into 2 strands of red silk. I don't know what this thread is. The label from the bobbin is gone. I doubt it's silk, but it is red. And in the silk that I do have, I don't have a true red. So I'll just tie that in. It is a one strand that I folded in half to create 2, so I do a dubbing loop. And since I don't have red squirrel, I'm going to use the red-orange fibers from a fox squirrel. I'll just lay those into that thread. I do have this spinner. Keep that squirrel hair between the 2 pieces of thread. And then I'll just go ahead and spin that up. It does turn out to be a fairly buggy body with just that little bit of red undertone in it. And if I've got a lot of bad guard hairs, I can clip those out and clean up the body. Let me bring my thread back up here to where I'm going to tie off the body. And then I'm just going to wrap that fairly buggy body with this dubbed or loop dub. Not quite touching wraps, but enough to build the body and maybe even taper it a little bit as I go to the front. Not real worried about a taper though, as long as I don't get smaller as I go to the front. And then when I get up here where I'm going to tie in the wing, I'm going to go over the top of that standard 3 times to catch it in. I'll lift up on my dubbing loop and wrap under it real close 3 times, and then I'll clip out all of this extra and maybe trim down the body just a little bit, pull out some of those longer guard hairs. The wing is mallard flank, so I've just grabbed a pinch of that mallard flank barbs, and it's supposed to be kind of splayed, so I'm going to measure those. I don't want them longer than the shank of the hook, and I'm going to tie them in right here in front of the body, right behind the eye. Just wrap over that, bring it back up so make sure it's sitting on top of the shank. Go ahead and wrap under that to catch that tail in, and then I'm going to lift up. Before I cut that off, I'm going to lift up on that wing and wrap behind it. That'll get it to stand up. I'm not exactly working for a divided wing, but if that happens, I guess it's not a problem. It's just kind of supposed to be spread out. And another wrap behind. Try to get that to stand up. And then I'm going to clip out the ends, the waist end, keeping the eye clean and not clipping the wing. Go ahead and wrap up over the top of that. I do want to put a little bit more wax on my thread because it's looking pretty white there. That way I'll get a tan head on it, or off-white is really what it's turning out to be. This is not as dark a wax maybe as I ought to use, but the black wax that I have doesn't really give me a tan either. And for the hackle, I have another one of those feathers off of that, probably furnace hackle, but I'm calling it a natural red and not a dyed red. So I clip the butt end of that, and then I'm going to give it that crew cut, just clipping off barbs on each side of this rachis. That gives me short little barbs right along the rachis that the thread will grab when I wrap over it. And keep it out away from the eye, and then wrap in front and behind the wing. And I'll bring my thread back up in front where I'll do the tie off. I'll grab that feather with my hackle pliers. I did try to tie it in with the shiny side forward, but I don't know if it twists and wraps the other way. I'm not going to cry about it. These barbs will mostly just stand up straight because this is a cock hackle. There's virtually no web in them, and they're not very flexible, so that'll give me that dry fly. And I'm not using a modern genetically engineered hackle because that would not have been a thing in the 1930s. Just wrap up over that tip of that feather 3 times to catch it in. I'm going to pull back. I don't want to wrap back on the hackle, but I do want to pull it back off of the eye. Helps if I wet my fingers a little bit, and then just wrap up over that tip to catch it in, and then I'll grab that tip out of there, snap it out. I've got one fiber in here, one hackle barb that I'm going to clip out. Keep the eye clean, and a little bit more wax. Keep that thread from being white. And I think I've got a clean enough eye, not very many barbs, sitting out in front. So I'm going to do a whip finish. Otherwise I could use a half hitch tool and do a half hitch, except that when the thread is waxed, it doesn't like to slide off the half hitch tool. I think that looks fine. Go ahead and just take my scissors and push them against the thread right up next to the head, and that'll take that thread out. I'm going to put a drop of diluted goop just to cement in the wing and hackle behind the head. And because I didn't glue the head, there's not going to be any glue in the eye, and so I don't have to worry about it not being tippet ready.